It's good to see you. Happy to be
To je
here
dobre vás
and to
vidieť.
share this second
Som
presentation
šťastný, že tu
at this
môžem
camp
byť
meeting, annual camp meeting in
a že
Brazil.
môžem mať druhú prezentáciu na tomto
Um,
camp meetingu aj v camp meetingu v Brazílii.
Already the few seconds we have before the meeting starts and organizing and getting connected to the translators.
Máme ešte pár sekúnd, kým začne stretnutie. Ešte sa prepájajú prekladatelia.
Nicely transmitted this feeling of a camp meeting that we were used to in the past years.
Je to také pekné prepojenie sa na camp meetingu, na čo sme boli zvyknutí v minulých rokoch.
Very happy to see you all and God bless
Som
you.
šťastný, že vás môžem vidieť a nech vám Pán žehná.
So I would like to invite you to participate in the silent prayer with me.
Takže vás pozývam, aby ste sa účastnili so mnou pri tichej modlitbe.
Amen.
Amen.
Oh, all right. Would like to give you an overview.
Takže by som chcela vám dať také zhrnutie.
My topic is good Protestantism versus bad Catholicism.
Moja téma je dobrý protestantizmus versus zlý katolicizmus.
And of course, you know that's not that easy and not that simple as I just tried to convene with this title.
Samozrejme vieme, že nie je to také jednoduché, ako sa to snažím vás presvedčiť s týmto názvom.
So you can imagine that this presentation is going to be in tune with the recent series of Vespers.
Takže môžete predpokladať, že táto prezentácia bude taká ako keby zosúladená s tými nedávnymi večernými stretnutiami.
And I'd like to expand a little bit on one aspect, on one example that Elder Tess has been given.
A chcel by som trošku tak rozšíriť jeden príklad, ktorý nám dávala staršia Tess.
The example of Protestantism being seen by us as good.
Ten príklad toho protestantizmu, na ktorý my sme sa pozerali ako na dobrý.
On one hand, right?
Na jednej strane.
And on the other hand, Catholicism as being the bad.
A na druhej strane ako na katolicizmus, na ten zlý.
And with this simplification that we get from Spirit of Prophecy.
A s týmto zjednodušením, ktoré máme alebo dostávame z ducha prorockého
from the Bible,
a z Biblie,
we get a correct understanding.
Dostaneme správne porozumenie.
Nevertheless, as this is a very extreme simplification.
Ale toto je veľmi také extrémne zjednodušenie.
Though it's right, it bears this great danger of being misused.
Je to síce správne, ale je vo veľkom nebezpečenstve, že to bude zle použité.
Or as we are saying, to being bent.
Alebo ako my hovoríme, že sa to posolstvo toho tak zohne, že sa to skriví.
Or we can also say it has this possibility to being bent.
Je to možnosť toho, že vlastne sa to zohne.
I'll try to put a little bit, give a little bit of information.
Chcel by som skúsiť dať trochu informácií.
On some parts of history of Protestantism.
Na niektoré časti histórie protestantizmu.
Specifically on the history of those two men here.
Zvlášť dejiny týchto dvoch mužov tu.
Martin Luther basically the initiator of Lutheranism.
On bol vlastne zakladateľ luteranizmu alebo evangelickej cirkvi.
And then Mr. Calvin, the reformer,
A
who led to Calvinism.
zase Kalvín, reformátor, ktorý založil kalvinizmus.
Trying to focus especially on those two because Ellen White mentions them specifically.
Zameriavam sa na týchto dvoch, pretože o nich zvlášť hovorí Ellen Whiteová.
And although those two are very important for the history of Protestantism and the fight against Catholicism,
Aj keď títo dvaja sú veľmi dôležití v protestantizme a v tom boji proti katolicizme,
they have promulgated some ideas, they have said some things, they have done things
oni určité myšlienky tak niesli, povedali veci, urobili veci,
that have and had a huge impact of how Christians would behave in society.
Ktoré mali obrovský dopad na to, ako sa kresťania budú správať v spoločnosti.
Sometimes these relationship between what one of these men said and how it's being used and interpreted in the 21st century or 20th century is difficult to show.
Niekedy je ťažké ukázať vlastne, čo títo muži povedali a ako sa to má interpretovať v 21. storočí.
And exactly this is very interesting, an interesting part of the study.
A toto presne je veľmi zaujímavá časť štúdia.
Because atrocities that these men have said or done are not unknown.
A pretože tie veci, čo títo ľudia povedali alebo spravili, není tajné, vie sa o nich. Sú zaznamenané, dejiny ich poznajú.
Nevertheless, the Protestants today, in one way or another, try to handle their own history.
Protestanti dnes jedným alebo druhým spôsobom sa snažia nejako vysporiadať s tými svojimi dejinami.
Unfortunately, oftentimes neglecting or trying to kind of forget what has been said or done.
Na nešťastie mnohokrát zabudnú alebo zanedbajú to, čo sa hovorilo.
So it is really a complex issue to deal with the theology and worldviews of the founders of Protestantism.
Toto je naozaj teológia zakladateľov protestantizmu.
And it has been a complex task for Protestants.
A to bola taká komplexná úloha pre protestantov.
And maybe we will be able to see a little bit after this study.
Možno trošku uvidíme po tej štúdii,
how the complexity of history has been a stumbling block for the very same Protestants.
Ako tá komplexnosť dejín bola tiež takým kameňom úrazu pre protestantov.
And I'm not even able to have a closer look into the theology.
A ja ani nie som schopný sa nejak tak zbližšia pozrieť na tú teológiu.
You may be aware that Ellen White has mentioned that there were some things that were not quite understanding correctly.
Možno viete, že Ellen Whiteová hovorila, že boli určité veci, ktorým nerozumeli správne.
And therefore, theological error in the Bible interpretation has been adopted by millions of Christians.
Takže tieto teologické omyly boli potom následne prijaté miliónmi kresťanov.
All right, so I hope I'm not going to bore you because it's kind of a historical presentation, a technical presentation.
Dúfam, že vás to nebude nudiť, lebo je to taká historicko-technická prezentácia.
Right, so here I'm going to share two quotes
Chcem sa
by Ellen
podeliť
Gould White.
o dva citáty od Ellen Whiteovej.
That should give us an idea why it's easy to understand who is the good and who is the bad in the fight between Protestants and Catholics.
Tie by nám mali pomôcť porozumieť vlastne v tom, že kto je ten dobrý a ten zlý v tomto boji medzi katolíkmi a protestantmi.
Starting with the first one from Spirit of Prophecy, Volume 4.
Takže začíname s duchom prorockým, 4.
Under Luther began the Reformation in Germany. Calvin preached the gospel in France, Zwingli in Switzerland. The world was awakened from the slumber of ages as from land to land were sounded the magic words, religious liberty. Za
Luthera sa začala reformácia v Nemecku. Kalvín hlásal evanjelium vo Francúzsku. Zwingli vo Švajčiarsku. Svet sa prebudil zo spánku vekov, keď zo zeme do zeme zaznievali čarovné slova, náboženská sloboda.
So I'm sure that you are very well aware of how this word is being used today.
Som si istý, že viete, ako toto slovo sa používa dnes.
Religious liberty.
Náboženská sloboda.
From or inside American evangelical Protestantism.
Vnútri evangelikálneho protestantizmu.
Nevertheless, it's the very thing that these men were able to create or to yes.
Boli rôzne veci, ktoré títo muži boli...
These two reformers were able to bring to light.
Ktoré títo reformátori mohli priviesť vlastne, ktoré mohli vyviesť na svetlo.
And now a second quote from, this is great controversy.
Druhý citát je z Veľkého sporu.
Such were the means which Rome had invoked to quench the light of the Reformation, to withdraw from men the Bible, and to restore the ignorance and superstition of dark ages. But under God's blessing and the labors of those noble men whom he had raised up to succeed Luther, Protestantism was not overthrown. Not to the favor or arms of princes was it to owe its strength. The smallest countries, the humblest and least powerful nations became its strongholds. And please put attention here on this name. It was Little Geneva. Give some time to translate.
Takéto boli prostriedky, ktorých sa Rím dovolával, aby uhasil svetlo reformácie, aby odňal ľuďom Bibliu a obnovil nevedomosť a poverčivosť temných vekov. Ale pod Božím požehnaním a prácou tých šľachetných mužov, ktorých Boh vychoval ako nástupcov Lutera, protestantizmus nebol zvrhnutý. Za svoju silu nevďačil priazni ani zbraniam kniežat. Jeho pevnosťami sa stali najmenšie krajiny, najpokornejšie a najmenej mocné národy. Bola to Malá Ženeva. A toto chcem, aby ste si všimli. Malá Ženeva.
Okay, it was little Geneva in the midst of mighty foes plotting her destruction. It was Holland on her sandbanks by the Northern Sea, wrestling against the tyranny of Spain. Then the greatest and most opulent of kingdoms. It was bleak, sterile Sweden that gained victories for the Reformation.
Bola to Malá Ženeva uprostred mocných nepriateľov, ktorí plánovali jej zničenie. Bolo to Holandsko na svojich piesočných brehoch pri Severnom mori, ktoré zápasilo proti tyranii Španielska, vtedy najväčšieho a najbohatšieho kráľovstva. Bolo to bezútešné neplodné Švédsko, ktoré získalo víťazstva pre reformáciu.
Okay, so in a minute we'll have a little look on this little Geneva who gained victory for the Reformation.
Takže na chvíľočku sa pozrieme na túto malú Ženevu, ktorá získala víťazstvo nad reformáciou.
We dive in a little bit into the history how this happened, what she describes here in these beautiful words.
Pozrieme sa do dejín, že čo sa tu vlastne stalo, to, čo tu ona popisuje v týchto pekných slovách.
And for this to have no doubts on what part of history to what part of history she's referring to.
Aby sme nemali pochybnosti o tom, že o ktorých dejinách ona hovorí.
We have the continuation.
Máme tu pokračovanie.
In continuation saying.
Máme tu pokračovanie.
For nearly 30 years, Calvin labored at Geneva. First to establish there a church adhering to the morality of the Bible, and then for the advancement of the Reformation throughout Europe. His course as a public leader was not faultless. Nowhere his doctrines free from error, but he was instrumental in promulgating truth that were of special importance in his time, in maintaining the principle of Protestantism against the fast returning tide of popery, and in promoting in the Reformed churches simplicity and purity of life, in places of the pride and corruption fostered under the Romish teaching.
Takmer 30 rokov pracoval Kalvín v Ženeve. Najprv tam založil cirkev, ktorá sa držala morálky Biblie, a potom sa usiloval o rozvoj reformácie v celej Európe. Jeho verejná činnosť nebola bezchybná a ani jeho učenie nebolo bez omylov. Prispel však v šíreniu právd, ktoré mali v jeho dobe mimoriadny význam. K udržaniu zásad protestantizmu, proti rýchlo sa vracajúcemu prúdu pápežstva a k presadzovaniu jednoduchosti a čistoty života v reformovaných cirkvách namiesto pýchy a skazenosti podporovanej rímskym učením.
All right, so just want to ponder a little bit on these words.
Takže tieto slová som chcel trošku ešte tak rozšíriť.
The prophet says he established a church.
Prorok hovorí, že on založil cirkev.
The church was adhering to the morality of the Bible.
A ona sa držala morálky Biblie.
Then he labored from Geneva in favor of the advancements of the Reformation throughout Europe.
A potom vlastne zo Ženevy pracoval na šírení právd naskrz Európou.
And it sounds almost a little bit like in brackets that she also says and admits, of course, he was not faultless.
A ona tiež aj hovorí a priznáva, áno, samozrejme, on nebol bez chýb.
But then she returns to her argument of what he did good.
Potom sa vracia k tomu argumentu, že čo spravil dobre.
He was instrumental in promulgating truths that were of special importance in his time.
On roznášal tie pravdy, ktoré mali veľkú dôležitosť pre jeho dobu.
Yes, maintaining principles of Protestantism against the fast returning tide of popery.
A ten protestantizmus, ktorý bol potrebný k udržaniu zásad protestantizmu, proti rýchlo sa vracajúcemu prúdu pápežstva a k predsadzovaniu jednoduchosti a čistoty života v reformovaných cirkvách.
So these special truths that were so important for their time.
Takže tieto zvláštne pravdy, ktoré boli tak dôležité pre tú dobu,
these were the things that he did.
To boli veci, ktoré on spravil.
I'm trying to have a little look on the history of Calvinism.
Ja sa snažím sa trošku pozrieť na dejiny kalvinizmu.
One, because I believe that they contribute in producing a complex vision of Calvinism.
Ja verím, že oni produkujú takú komplexnú víziu kalvinizmu.
And on the other hand, I believe that these things that happened there in Geneva and throughout history, they contributed to things that Calvinism and its successors later would also do or use.
A na druhej strane verím, že tieto veci, čo sa udiali v Ženeve, mali vlastne dopad alebo formovali ten kalvinizmus a to, čo oni neskôr robili, používali, ako sa slovo kalvinizmus používa. Tak.
So basically, there may be better quotes here, but on Luther and Kalvín by Ellen Gould White.
Máme aj lepšie ešte možno citáty od Ellen Whiteovej, o Kalvínovi a Lutherovi.
But it seems pretty clear to me that it seems absolutely easy to understand how good these men were.
Ale je ľahké z toho vyčítať, že akí títo muži boli dobrí.
And despite some little errors and things, they were just the good on one side versus the bad on the other side.
Napriek nejakým chybám a omylom, ktoré mali alebo robili, oni stali na tej dobrej strane v opozícii voči tej druhej, ktorá stála na nesprávnej.
In a minute when we will see what Calvin did in Geneva, we'll understand why Ellen White says he was not faultless.
Keď za chvíľu uvidíme, čo Kalvín spravil v Ženeve, tak budeme rozumieť, prečo Ellen Whiteová hovorí, že nebol bez chýb.
It was really not a little thing that he did.
To nebola nejaká malá vec, ktorú on spravil.
And then we have this quote here.
Potom tu máme tento citát.
Which is a little different.
Ten je trošku iný.
The Lutherans cannot be drawn to go any farther than what Luther saw. And the Calvinists, you see, stick fast where they were left by that great man of God, who yet saw not all things. This is a misery much to be lamented. For though they were burning and shining lights in their time, yet they penetrated not into the whole counsel of God, but where they now living would be as willing to embrace further light as that which they first received.
Luteránov nemožno pritiahnuť k tomu, aby išli ďalej, než čo videl Luther. A Kalvíni, ako vidíte, sa pevne držia tam, kde ich zanechal tento veľký Boží muž, ktorý však nevidel všetko. To je nešťastie, nad ktorým treba veľmi smútiť, lebo hoci boli vo svojej dobe horiacimi a žiarivými svetlami, predsa len neprenikali do celej Božej rady, ale keby teraz žili, boli by rovnako ochotní prijať ďalšie svetlo ako to, ktoré dostali ako prvé.
One thing that Ellen White is doing,
jedna vec, ktorú Ellen Whiteová robí,
she is aware of the necessity to judge people within their time.
Ona si je vedomá tej nutnosti súdenia ľudí v ich dobe.
And then she does something interesting.
A potom robí niečo zaujímavé.
She says something like, but where they're living today, would they be living in our time?
A hovorí, my, čo žijeme dnes, keby oni žili za nášho času,
they would embrace the light that we today are seeing.
Oni by prijali to svetlo, ktoré vidíme my dnes.
So Luther would be in favor of equality, I guess.
Takže Luther potom by súhlasil s rovnosťou.
He indeed was not in his time.
V jeho dobe to tak nebolo. V jeho dobe nesúhlasil.
And why I'm saying this is why I think this is interesting is because I learned the other day from a historian.
Dôvod, prečo myslím si, že je to zaujímavé, lebo som sa minule niečo naučil od historika.
That it is a principle for every historian that you cannot take people and judge them out of their time.
Že nemôžete ľudí vlastne posudzovať mimo tú ich dobu. Nemôžete ich vyťahnuť z tej doby a súdiť ich mimo tej doby.
What would this person have done today?
Čo by tento človek urobil dnes?
But Ellen White is a prophet and she knows.
Ale Ellen Whiteová je prorok a ona vie.
Okay, so there's a little bit of introduction why it seems to be which helped us to understand as Adventists, as people of this movement later on, to see that the Protestants are the good ones and the Catholics are the bad ones.
Takže toto je takého trošku svetla, ktoré nám pomohlo porozumieť tomu, že prečo protestanti sú tí dobrí a katolíci tí zlí.
And by the way, I guess there is much complexity also in history of Catholicism.
Ja verím, že je mnoho komplexností aj v dejinách katolicizmu.
But I haven't looked into it and I'm not making it part of the study.
Ale som sa na to nepozeral a ani to nezaradujem do tejto štúdie.
Basically because looking into Protestantism is looking into our own history.
Pozeranie sa na protestantizmus, to je ako pozeranie sa na naše vlastné dejiny.
Okay, so for me, what was important to understand how we relate to Calvinists, what is our relationship to Calvinism, Lutheranism, was important to see how they connected with our movement or with our church.
To, čo bolo dôležité pre mňa vidieť ohľadne luteranizmu a kalvinizmu, bolo, že ako oni sa prepájajú vlastne s našim hnutím, s našou cirkvou.
Yeah, and I'm trying to just visually and historically to just recapitulate a little bit this history of how Calvinism spread.
Snažím sa vizuálne a historicky tak zrekapitulovať tie dejiny toho, ako sa kalvinizmus šíril.
I think this is part of the homework that we usually get from the elders.
Myslím, že toto je súčasťou domácej úlohy, ktorú väčšinou dostávame od starších.
They speak about the Enlightenment or the Second Revival or Kalvín.
Keď hovoria o nejakom osvietení alebo presbyteriánskej cirkvi alebo o Kalvíne.
But they cannot invest too much time and explain what these elements are.
Ale väčšinou nemôžu traviť príliš veľa času a vysvetľovať, čo tieto jednotlivé zložky znamenajú.
So in case that you don't have this information in your mind already about Calvin.
V prípade, ak nemáte tieto informácie vo svojej mysli ohľadne Kalvína,
he did live from 1509 to 64.
On žil od 1500
and he's regarded as second generation reformer.
A považujú ho za za reformátora druhej generácie.
Martin Luther just for the record was living a couple of years before him.
Martin Luther, len tak, aby sme si to povedali kvôli záznamu, žil
1483 to 1546.
Od 483 do 1483 do 1546. Takže Kalvín bol ovplyvnený Lutherom. Kalvín bol ovplyvnený Lutherom a on vlastne svoju prácu misijnú začal vo Francúzsku.
But also his work spread to the Netherlands.
Ale jeho dielo sa tiež rozšírilo do Holandska.
At least in the French-speaking areas.
Aspoň určite do tých francúzskych hovoriacich oblastí.
Kind of here. And it would later also go to Scotland.
Neskôr to išlo aj do Španielska, do Škótska,
John Knox adopted it.
Pretože John Knox to prijal.
So it comes here to this island.
Takže to prichádza na tento ostrov.
But it was also present in Germany.
A bolo to prítomné aj v Nemecku.
So Calvinism was influencing basically the typical parts of the reformatory movement in Northern Europe.
Takže kalvinizmus tak typicky reprezentoval tie reformačné hnutia v Severnej Európe.
And after a time, England, Scotland, Netherlands, France, and then also Switzerland became influenced.
A po nejakom čase to bolo Anglicko, Škótsko, Holandsko, potom aj Švajčiarsko, ktoré bolo ovplyvnené aj Francúzsko.
They adopted basically some basic ideas of Calvinist theology.
Oni prijali niektoré základné myšlienky tej kalvinistickej teológie,
which had some major differences to Lutheran theology.
Čo malo veľké rozdielnosti oproti luteránskej teológii.
One important question in that time was Lord's Supper.
Jedna dôležitá otázka v tej dobe bola Večera Pánova.
So if you break the bread, is Jesus in the bread? You know, this discussion that came from Catholicism.
Takže keď láme sa chlieb, je Ježiš v tom chlebe? Toto je vlastne diskusia, ktorá prišla z katolícizmu.
And Kalvín basically was adhering to the idea that it's just a symbol of the whole event.
Kalvín sa prikláňal k tej myšlienke, že je to len symbol celej tej udalosti.
While Luther tried to defend the idea that Jesus is there, he is present at the procedure.
Ale Luther sa prikláňal k myšlienke, že Ježiš je tam priamo prítomný.
All right, so anyways, many other discussions, of course, just one example.
Po tých diskusí bolo viacej, toto je len jeden príklad.
The Presbyterians in England, they take Calvinist Puritan confession as the foundation of their confession.
Presbyteriani berú ako súčasť toho svojho vyznania vlastne kalvinizmus, alebo je to základ toho vyznania.
Yes. The Calvinist confession.
To kalvinistické vyznanie.
Which was called the Westminster Confession. So, and Presbyterians were amongst the founders of the Adventist movement, right?
Presbyteriani boli aj zakladatelia adventného hnutia.
Right, just to get an idea of the links, the connections, how these ideas were connected and spread.
To len aby sme tak nejak videli to prepojenie, ako sa tieto myšlienky šírili a vzájomne boli prepojené.
So you can basically say that Europe was basically following Calvinistic ideas. Also, there's some in Poland, I think, in Czech Republic, in these areas here, Hungary. There are also minor movements that are following Calvin.
Takže v Európe sa šíril kalvinizmus a máme tu ešte aj iné časti Európy, ako Poľsko, nejaké ďalšie, kde tiež Kalvín pôsobil.
It also then became important in South Africa through the Dutch.
A tiež sa to dostalo do Južnej Afriky skrze
in Korea.
Dutch, to sú... A do Korei.
And of course in the United States.
Tiež do Spojených štátov.
In the United States, I read that most settlers in mid-Atlantic in New England were Calvinists. So I guess this is these areas here, right?
A väčšina tých osadníkov v Anglicku boli tiež kalvinisti.
Siedler. English Puritans, French Huguenots, Dutch settlers, they're all influenced by Calvinism.
Anglickí puritáni, holandskí, neviem, settlers, ale neviem, čo to povedal za meno.
They were
often všetci boli ovplyvnení
primary founders of the United States of America, those men and women.
Títo muži a ženy, v podstate ženy, boli považovaní za zakladateľov Ameriky.
So you can easily see how Calvinism became very important for the history of the Protestants in the world.
Takže vidíme, ako bol kalvinizmus veľmi dôležitý v dejinách protestantizmu aj sveta. To bolo len také zhrnutie, aby ste mali takú predstavu o tom, ako sa šírila táto časť protestantizmu, táto vetva protestantizmu.
Because we speak about, at least in my case, I hear about Calvinism, but I didn't really know what does Calvinism really have to do with the Calvinism in the United States? How did it work? So it's just a history. Settlers brought it over. It spread in Europe. Settlers brought it over. It established there.
Ja sám som nevedel, ako sa kalvinizmus vyvíjal, takže to ako keby tak vyrašilo v Európe a odtiaľ sa to šírilo aj do Ameriky, aj na iné miesta.
And then you also have to take into account the following.
A tiež musíte zvážiť následovné.
That there's the Calvinistic movement in churches in itself.
Že kalvinistické cirkvi, alebo to hnutie ako také.
Then you have Calvinistic theology.
Je jedna vec, ale potom je kalvinistická teológia.
Calvinist theology you can find in many denominations.
A túto kalvinistickú teológiu môžeme nájsť v mnohých denomináciách.
I remember Methodists and there are other important Presbyterians.
Pamätám si metodistov a mnohých ďalších dôležitých presbyteriánov.
All right, so this is kind of that was the second part of my presentation. Now we come to the third part.
Takže toto bola druhá časť mojej prezentácie, prichádzame k tretej.
And this is the focus on what did Calvin do in Geneva.
A to sa chceme zamerať na to, že čo urobil Kalvín v Ženeve.
I call it the Geneva project.
Ja to nazývam projekt Ženeva.
We have already heard that Calvin was in the beginning working as a missionary in France.
My sme už čítali, že Kalvín pôsobil ako misionár vo Francúzsku.
And then he was traveling in Europe. He was on the way from Basel to Strasbourg.
Cestoval po Európe, teraz menuje nejaké mestá.
And he made a stop over in Geneva.
Ale asi tá jeho základňa bola v Ženeve.
So there he met someone, a preacher, which is called Farel.
Tam stretol kazateľa, ktorý sa volal Farel.
And by the way, this image here of Calvin.
Tento obraz Kalvína.
This is a stone wall in Geneva.
Toto je taký kameň veľký, alebo taká stena kamená v Ženeve.
Where you have many important reformers side by side. Kde je mnoho dôležitých reformátorov, jeden vedľa druhého. I think on this side stands Farel, actually.
Myslím, že na tejto strane stojí Farel.
And you can visit today, of course, in Geneva.
Aj dnes môžeme v Ženeve navštíviť.
And it's not for nothing that this Calvin here looks kind of mean, right?
Tuto ten Kalvín pôsobí tak nepríjemne, tak voľako taký ako keby taký zle.
We are getting there.
A k tomu prichádzame.
All right, so at the beginning he was just teaching in a school.
Na začiatku učil v škole.
It was a very strict school.
Bola to prísna škola.
No theatrical games, no games of chance, no bad singing.
Boli tam zakázané divadlá, akékoľvek hry, žiadne nesprávne spievanie. Nesmelo sa tam nič také konať, čo by bolo možno zvodné, alebo ten typ oblečenia nosiť.
It sounds exactly like an Adventist school, right?
To znie presne ako adventná škola, nie?
All the same rules. So the youth are learning how to behave properly as Protestants.
Všetko také pravidlá, kde sa mládež učí, ako sa správne chovať ako protestanti.
Regular attendance to church service, reception of Lord's Supper, intensive Bible study, all must.
Pravidelné bohoslúžby, intenzívne štúdium Biblie, ešte niečo tam bolo.
Today, but when I was in Adventist university with the dorm. Že všetko ako na našej škole to je. Ja keď som bol u adventistov na univerzite, na našej adventnej univerzite. Your attendance was registered every time you come to the worship, right? You couldn't go into the church with chinelas, how you say it, hawaianas.
Na našej univerzite vždycky sme sa museli zapísať, keď sme prišli na bohoslúžbu. Nemohli sme chodiť oblečení, teraz asi hovorí o oblečení.
Alright, so everything alright so far.
Bežne, obyčajne.
But what happens when someone does not comply?
Neviem, či som dobre pochopila. Dobre, ale čo sa stane, keď niekto sa týmto pravidlám nejak tak neprispôsobí?
So, and of course, Calvin was not interested solely in the society of young people which attended his school.
Calvin nebol spojený iba s mladými ľuďmi, ktorí chodili na školu.
Since he had a much broader vision of impacting and bringing Protestantism to the society of Geneva. Ale on mal veľký dopad na vývoj spoločnosti v Ženeve. So he drafted a paper of church discipline which he proposed to the city council.
Takže a teraz som nepochopila, čo spravil. Niečo s mestským úradom, tam zobral nejaký papier od cirkvi, to som nepochopila.
Every citizen, by this idea that he proposed, should be bound every citizen to common knowledge of faith by oath.
Každý občan by mal byť zaviazaný nejakému bežnému poznaniu a vyznaniu viery. Čo tým myslel? Každý občan mal byť protestant, mal rozumieť tomu, čo verí a mal to vyznať.
So he had the idea of really grasping not only those that were in the school, but the whole society needed to be under church control.
Takže on mal túto myšlienku toho, že vlastne celá spoločnosť musí byť pod vplyvom a vládou cirkvi.
All right, so the people in the city did not like this very much, this idea.
Ľuďom sa toto v meste moc nepáčilo, táto myšlienka.
There were big protests against these plans.
Boli tu veľké protesty voči týmto plánom.
And at the end of the story, he needed to go away. He had to leave Geneva.
A nakoniec on musel odísť zo Ženevy. Čiže on priniesol vlastne taký cirkevný návrh na mestský úrad.
The city asked him to return.
A o 2 roky neskôr ho mesto požiadalo, aby sa vrátil.
And of course, in such a case, you have the possibility to demand some things.
A v takomto prípade máte možnosti niečo požadovať, vyžadovať.
So he drafted again the church order.
Takže zase tak napísal nejaký cirkevný poriadok,
which was then adopted, of course, by the city council.
Ktorý bol vtedy prijatý mestským úradom.
As the basic law of the Republic of Geneva.
Že to je vlastne ako základné právo alebo základný zákon Republiky Ženevy.
We will see that he did not necessarily have the desire to work with the state so much.
On nemal nezbytne až takú túžbu nejak tak pracovať so štátom.
But he definitely wanted to control the state or the citizens in the state.
Ale on určite chcel ovládať tých občanov v tom štáte. Chcel mať vládu nad tým.
Or perhaps we should say frame it differently. He wanted to have this. He wanted to treat, as I see it, the state as a church.
Ja to tak vidím, že on chcel s tým štátom zaobchádzať ako s cirkvou.
Okay, there were many who didn't like this, but as they called him to come, so they accepted his proposal.
Bolo mnohých, ktorým sa to nepáčilo, ale oni prijali ten jeho návrh.
And part of this plan was the formation of a moral court, the famous moral court of Geneva.
A súčasťou tohto plánu bolo nejaké také vydanie morálneho kódu Ženevy.
The court is like a council of a certain number of men.
To bola ako keby taká rada, alebo výbor určitého množstva mužov.
It's a council, it's ein Rat.
To bolo ako nejaká rada alebo výbor.
And they were watching over the moral behavior of the citizen of Geneva.
A oni sledovali toto morálne správanie ľudí a obyvateľov Ženevy.
Okay, so because they needed them to be proper Protestants.
Lebo oni potrebovali od nich, aby boli poriadnymi protestantami.
So, gambling, dancing, drinking alcohol.
Takže ako nejaké hazardné hry, tancovanie, alkohol.
All these misbehaviors were brought in front of this court who judged upon it.
Všetko toto zlé správanie sa priviedlo pred tento súdny dvor alebo túto radu takúto. A oni to riešili, rozsudzovali.
Those people were brought before Calvin himself, who talked to them.
Vo väčšine týchto prípadov tí ľudia boli privedení priamo pred Kalvína a on s nimi potom rozprával o tom. Hovoril.
So I guess there was this very missionary idea of trying to convince people for the better.
Tak myslím, že mal asi takú misionárskú myšlienku, aby ľudí presvedčil na niečo lepšie.
If this did not work, there were some stronger measures like excommunication and sorts of like this sort of things.
Keď toto nefungovalo, tak boli potom také nejaké ďalšie ako keby sankcie alebo nejaké tresty.
Okay, so this was a pretty good thing in the eyes of Calvin, but he also became then an advisor to the city.
A toto bolo taká pre Kalvína sa mu to zdala dobrá vec a on sa stal potom aj
because he was a lawyer.
Neviem, či starostom toho mesta, alebo radou mesta. On bol právnik.
So he had some good input for the city.
Pracoval v mestskej rade a on mal tam dobrý vplyv, dobré vklady ako právnik.
So, and as a result of this, there were some laws that were released by the city.
A následkom toho boli niektoré zákony, ktoré toto mesto vydalo.
For example, you cannot give your children improper names.
Napríklad, svojim deťom nemôžete dávať nevhodné mená.
In other words, parents don't have the right to choose the name of their children as they want.
Inými slovami, rodičia nemajú právo dať deťom také meno, aké oni chcú.
Especially Catholic names.
A zvlášť už nie katolícke mená.
Sunday sanctification was a must.
Svetenie nedele bola povinnosť.
By law.
Zo zákona.
I guess this is a Sunday law.
To je ako nedeľný zákon.
And there were also some penalties against blasphemy, fornication, drunkenness, etc.
Boli aj nejaké také sankcie alebo pokuty za smilstvo, za opitosť. A ešte neviem, čo menovalo.
So you see that there is all of a sudden a mingling a little bit of this figure in church territory and state's territory.
Takže vidíte tu, že on je taká postava, ktorá sa tak nejak mieša alebo chodí medzi teritoriom, ktoré patrí štátu a ktoré patrí cirkvi.
Where for this reformer it seemed to be just natural that his influence and his impact in society could not end in the church field.
Preňho bolo také úplne prirodzené rozmýšľať tak, že jeho vplyv ako duchovného vodcu nekončí v cirkvi.
So he was trying to get a bigger grasp on the society of Geneva.
Takže on sa snažil tak viac uchopiť celú tú spoločnosť v Ženeve.
And now there are many stories.
Je mnoho príbehov.
Just give you one or two examples.
Dám vám jeden alebo dva príklady.
There was a Spanish doctor, Michel Servet.
Bol španielský doktor Michel Servet.
Who fled kind of to Geneva because he was anti-Trinitarian and persecuted.
Ktorý utekol do Ženevy, pretože bol prenasledovaný, bol proti Trojici.
But Calvinists took him and put him in front of the council.
Ale kalvinisti ho zobrali a priniesli ho pred túto radu.
And Calvin spoke to him in the prison.
A Kalvín sa s ním rozprával vo
väzení. And it is
väzení.
said that Calvin had only contempt for the Spanish doctor and no understanding for his fear of death.
A Kalvín hovoril, no a teraz som to zase neporozumela.
No. Keine Gnade empfand er. Exactly. So he saw him like as a weak man.
On ho videl ako takého slabého muža.
Finally, eventually, this doctor died at the stake.
Tento doktor nakoniec zomrel.
And I don't know how this worked exactly, but they used some techniques that his death was prolonged. Yeah, delayed.
Neviem presne, ako toto fungovalo, ale používali nejaký spôsob na to, že tá jeho smrť bola predĺžená.
I guess I understand because they use wet wood, so it burns slowly and yeah.
Používali mokré drevo a vlastne to horelo pomalšie.
And then I quote here, many religious
vlastne
people
upálený.
would have considered this execution a scandal.
Teraz budem citovať. Mnoho veriacich alebo náboženských ľudí by toto považovalo za škandál.
Since God's punishment had been anticipated, actually God had to judge him, right? But now the people judge him and punish him.
Že vlastne Pán Boh ho mal súdiť, ale teraz ho ľudia súdili.
this was understanding within Protestantism. You cannot, like the Catholics, impose a judgment.
Toto bolo porozumenie, ktoré protestantizmus mal, že nesmieme dovoliť katolíkom, aby vlastne vykonávali tresty za ako v mene Boha.
And what also happened is that Kalvín had actively promoted the trial of this man.
Kalvín vlastne aktívne ako keby propagoval alebo vyzdvihoval súd tohto muža.
So the whole procedure was seen as an approximation of the papal church, or rather of the actions of the Roman Inquisition.
Celý tento proces bol videný ako že to bolo ako rímska inkvizícia.
The whole procedure was an approximation of the papal church.
Priblížili sa tým k pápežskej cirkvi týmto procesom.
Or the actions of the Roman Inquisition.
Ako skutkom tej rímskej inkvizície.
So this is becoming complex, right?
Toto začína byť komplexné.
And remember what Ellen White says, that he did not behave totally correct in every detail.
Pamätajme, čo hovorila Ellen Whiteová, že on sa nesprával úplne správne v každom detaili.
And when you have a closer look, this was a very harsh government.
A keď sa pozrieme zbližšia, toto bola veľmi taká silná, tvrdá vláda.
Where you, at the end of the day, you have very similar, if not the same techniques used by the Roman Catholic Church.
Nakoniec to boli podobné, ak nie vlastne rovnaké spôsoby, aké používala katolícka cirkev.
In this little project of a little state, a church state.
Tento projekt cirkvi a štátu.
And this project actually wasn't that small because he was there for 15 years.
A tento projekt nebol až taký malý, lebo on tam pôsobil 15 rokov.
In 1555,
teda ten projekt fungoval.
Something happened.
1555 sa niečo stalo.
People rebelled. They didn't want to suffer under this iron fist of this man, Kalvín.
Ľudia sa vzburili, už nechceli trpieť pod touto železnou pesťou Kalvína.
And the people were demanding sovereignty of the secular power.
A ľudia sa dožadovali suverenity tej sekulárnej moci.
But Kalvín, the state, fought against the riots.
Ale Kalvín vlastne v mene štátu bojoval proti týmto vzbúrencom.
You would have even more Calvinists occupying the seats.
A v tých štátnych inštitúciách teraz bolo ešte viac kalvinistov, ktorí obsadzovali vlastne tie pozície.
Some leaders were sentenced to death and eventually executed.
Niektorí vodcovia boli odsúdení na smrť a aj zabití.
Assets were confiscated.
Boli konfiškované majetky.
Some were expelled, or there was expulsion from Geneva, totally imposed.
Niektorí boli vypudení zo Ženevy.
So at the end of the day, you have a third of the Geneva upper class was removed from the city.
Takže nakoniec to bola tretina tej vyššej triedy zo Ženevy, ktorá bola úplne vypudená z mesta.
So and then you have stability, finally, after 20 years of struggle between those who were standing behind Kalvín and those who wanted more sovereignty for the state.
A nakoniec boli ľudia, ktorí stali za Kalvínom a ľudia, ktorí chceli, aby vládol štát.
So
Myslím,
this reminds me a
som to
little
dobre
bit of the
pochopila.
history of Erdogan in Turkey.
Toto mi pripomína dejiny
We studied this the other day in
Erdogana v
one of our
Turecku.
presentations.
Toto sme študovali v jednej z prezentácií.
Well, this was this coup d'etat.
Kde bol tento
Erdogan was able
kudeta?
to manage to have more control after the coup d'etat than he had before, removing everyone who was against him, right?
A Erdoganovi sa podarilo získať viac kontroly, ako mal pred týmto kudetom, ako predtým.
All right. So at the end of the day, we have a situation in Geneva where everything is fits quite nicely in how
Alebo asi
Calvin
vzbúra,
wanted to have the state being led and organized.
Že po vzbúre mal viac ešte moci ako predtým. Prevrat.
And it was just growing and growing. You have more and more punishment and eliminations of opponents and church discipline imposed.
A toto celé rástlo viac a viac. Stále bolo viac vlastne tých, ktorí boli trestaní a tie tresty boli stále vyššie, ktorí boli vlastne oponenti tohto kalvinistického štátu.
All right. So there was actually a big, huge moral cleansing.
Takže bol veľký morálny úpadok.
I need to check for the mic. Give me a second.
Nie úpadok,
right. Battery running low, but we are
čistka.
coming also
Cleansing,
to the end, more or less.
Viac menej prichádzame k záveru.
Next thing I would like to have a look at or repeat a little bit.
Chcel by som niečo trošku zopakovať.
The next step after this example of Calvinism in practice.
Ďalší krok v tomto príklade kalvinizmu v praxi
is then what happens in the United States.
Bolo to, čo sa stalo v Spojených štátoch.
Remember that we
čo sa
have
deje v Spojených
studied
štátoch.
this quite thoroughly with Elder Tess.
Zo staršou tez sme toto študovali dosť
And she
podrobne.
took a big step back into history.
A ona si zobrala taký veľký krok späť do dejín.
To give us an understanding how this development of evangelicals and right-wing Protestantism in the United States had happened.
Aby sa s nami pozerala na to, ako sa udial ten vývoj evangelikálov a protestantizmu v Spojených štátoch.
And I would like to repeat a little bit the main steps.
Chcel by som trošku zopakovať tie hlavné kroky.
Before we then come and have tomorrow, Lord willing, a closer look on Luther and Lutherans.
Predtým, ako sa zajtra, ak pán dá, pozrieme bližšie na Lutera a luteránstvo.
All right, so now we were here, and now we are jumping over the ocean.
Takže boli sme tu a teraz prechádzame
And
cez oceán.
as you remember, Calvinism was basically important here in the northern part of the states.
Ako si pamätáte, kalvinizmus bol dôležitý tu na týchto severných častiach štátov.
And once again, everything has to do with its extreme, strong missionary activity.
A znovu všetko má dočinenie s takou extrémnou a silnou misionárskou
Because it
aktivitou.
started in France, it went to Geneva, it spread throughout Europe.
Začalo to vo Francúzsku, šírilo sa to zo Ženevy
And then it jumped over the ocean. And in those
cez
areas
Európu.
where Calvinists settled, they started to go to the south.
A potom to išlo cez oceán a tam, kde sa potom usadili tí Kalvinisti odtiaľ to išlo na juh.
And you might remember that one of the big issues was in this time period. I know we jump a little bit here in history.
Ja viem, že tu teraz trošku skáčem v dejinách.
But 1833 we have the formation of anti-slavery societies.
Ale v 1833 sa sformovali tie protiotrocké spoločnosti.
So just to help you a little bit with the structure, this is like kind of the fourth part of this presentation.
Aby sme tak vedeli sa orientovať v tej štruktúre, toto je taká štvrtá časť prezentácie.
Of simple versus complex in Protestantism and Catholicism.
A to nám pripomína tú logiku jednoduchého versus komplexného.
Secondly,
protestantizmus versus
understanding a
katolicizmus.
little bit the history of the spread and the development of Calvinism.
Snažíme sa porozumieť dejinám a šíreniu kalvinizmu.
Thirdly, we had a look at this Geneva example of God in its church state in Geneva.
A pozerali sme sa na tento príklad v Ženeve spojenia cirkvi a štátu.
And this example, I think, is so important because this man, he really had a lot of time to develop and to show how he believes faith should work in society.
Myslím si, že tento príklad je dôležitý, lebo tento muž mal mnoho času na to, aby nejak tak rozvinul to, ako má fungovať viera a štát v spoločnosti. Alebo ako má viera fungovať v spoločnosti. A ja verím tomu, to moje porozumenie je také, že kalvinizmus v dnešnej dobe Spojených štátov sa snaží robiť niečo veľmi podobné, aj keď má množstvo rôznych odnoží.
Now would be this history of Calvinism in the United States.
Takže tá štvrtá časť, to by boli dejiny kalvinizmu v Spojených štátoch.
Where you have in this history from the 1820s to the 1830s, you have the division.
Kde v týchto dejinách od 1830 do 40 rokov máme to rozdelenie. Na sever a juh.
One of the main waymarks here was the formation of anti-slavery societies in the north.
Jeden z hlavných milníkov tu bol sformovanie tých protiotrockých spoločností na severe.
Once again, this is all information what we learned from Elder Tess, and she was quoting a lot from the book The Evangelicals.
Toto sú informácie, ktoré sme sa naučili o staršej Tess. Ona mnoho citovala nám z knižky Evangelikály.
All right. So the formation of the anti-slavery societies had an impact.
Takže sformovanie týchto protiotrockých spoločností malo dopad.
Because it became a mass movement.
Pretože sa to stalo veľkým hnutím.
In the north.
Na severe.
Okay. But the issue of slavery split the three major evangelical denominations. And in 1845,
ale táto téma otroctva
and the Baptists formally divided along regional lines because of it. So
rozdelila protestantskú denomináciu.
People as well, they did this big important work of abolition.
Takže tieto spoločnosti na severe robili tú dôležité dielo abolície, zrušenia otroctva.
And without repeating every detail, but this ended up being, first of all, a mass movement in the north.
Toto sa stalo takým veľkým hnutím na
And by
severe.
1845,
Nechcem sa
a couple of years
opakovať.
later, it produced the big split in the three big evangelical churches.
A do roku 1845 to spôsobilo veľké rozdelenie v tých evangelikálnych cirkvách.
All right, you remember that, I guess.
To si budete pamätať.
And the split was along the regional lines.
A to rozdelenie vlastne išlo pozdĺž tých ako keby regionálnych hraníc.
You hear me now, I guess?
Dúfam, že ma už počujete.
Okay. So the split happened amongst once again. The split was in regional lines. Yes, in regions, by region.
Takže to rozdelenie išlo vlastne pozdĺž hraníc regionálnych.
And basically, in this reform, in this missionary effort that the northern churches and the northern missionaries and the anti-slavery societies had within the United States from north to south.
Toto misionárske úsilie, ktoré tí severní misionári mali, bolo ísť zo severu na juh. Bolo to v rámci Spojených štátov.
This was felt by the southern states as an invasion.
Južné štáty sa na to pozerali ako na inváziu.
They understood that the northern, or these missionaries in the churches and anti-slavery societies, they were trying to control the church rights in the southern states.
Oni to chápali tak, že títo severania sa snažia kontrolovať a ovládať štátne práva tých, ktorí sú na juhu.
They were arguing that the northern missionaries and workers, they were violating religious freedom.
Oni sa hádali, že vlastne oni znásilňujú náboženskú slobodu. Tí severania.
And yes, they were violating their liberty or taking away their liberty.
Že im berú ich slobodu.
And you remember in the statement of Ellen White that religious freedom was the big thing which the reformers accomplished.
Pamätáte si, čo povedala Ellen Whiteová, že náboženská sloboda to bola veľká vec, ktorú dosiahli reformátori.
All right, so I'm going to end here.
Ja tu skončím.
We had a quick introduction with some details of this a little complex history.
To bol taký malý úvod k dosť komplexným dejinám.
It becomes complex if you look into history, actually, right?
Stane sa to komplexným, keď pozeráte sa do dejín.
Let me see. It seems that it didn't. It did share, right? So just finishing up here. Let's go back to Ellen White's statement in Great Controversy.
Poďme sa vrátiť k výroku Ellen Whiteovej vo Veľkom spore.
Where she says, and just understanding the history now, perhaps better we can see the statement.
Teraz, keď lepšie rozumieme dejinám, tak môžeme možno lepšie chápať aj ten výrok.
For nearly 30 years, Calvin labored at Geneva, first to establish their church adhering to the morality of the Bible, and then for the advancements of the Reformations throughout Europe.
Neviem, kde číta. Moment. Takmer 30 rokov pracoval v Ženeve. Najprv sa usilovalo rozvoj reformácie v celej Európe. Jeho verejná činnosť nebola bezchybná.
Right, so and it is not being faultless in Geneva in his project. It's hard to argue or to defend such a man if you have him doing such things, right?
Ona píše, že je bezchybný. Je dosť ťažké obhajovať muža, ktorý robil takéto veci však. Keď sa pozrieme, že čo robil v Ženeve.
But at the end of the day, we have to understand that simplifying this history.
Na konci ale musíme pochopiť, že zjednodušenie týchto dejín,
even this Geneva project and all the things that he did in power.
Dokonca aj ten ženevský projekt a všetky veci, ktoré spravil, keď bol pri moci.
If you simplify it.
Keď to zjednodušíme,
you still have a very important work that was against, as Ellen White says, the type of popery.
Stále máme dôležité dielo, o ktorom Ellen Whiteová hovorí, že bojoval proti pápežstvu.
And he was defending the principle and gaining victories for the nation.
A vlastne obraňoval princípy protestantizmu.
He was gaining victories for Reformation in defending Reformation.
On získal víťazstvá pre reformáciu, keď tú reformáciu bránil.
All right, so tomorrow when we have a look at Luther,
zajtra, keď sa pozrieme na Luthera,
we will further understand and see that people do not necessarily copy-paste.
Budeme vidieť, že to nebolo úplne tak nezbytne nejaké kopírovanie.
So the followers of Calvin do not necessarily believe that you need to or kill if they are in error.
Nasledovníci Kalvína, oni neverili v to, že musíme zabiť tých, ktorí sú v omyle a ktorí sú proti nám.
Nevertheless, the understanding of history and dealing and thinking about what has happened.
Ale porozumenie dejinám a tomu, čo sa stalo, rozmýšľaním o tom,
is such an important step for each religious body, for each church and movement.
Je to taký dôležitý krok pre každé také hnutie, určite také náboženské telo.
That if you do not do it properly, intensively,
a keď to nerobíme správne, intenzívne,
you are in great danger of bending or being bent.
Sme vo veľkom nebezpečenstve, buď, že my nejako zohneme tie dejiny, alebo my sami vlastne nás to zohne. My sa zohneme.
What seems so easy to understand, all of a sudden becomes turned upside down.
Trošku mi seká teraz.
In mind, I invite you to closing prayer.
Vypadol zvuk. Pomodlíme sa. Na chvíľočku vypadol zvuk.
Heavenly Father, thank you so much.
Drahý nebeský Otče, ďakujeme ti veľmi pekne.
Being able to open understanding our thought process.
Za to, že môžeme otvoriť to naše porozumenie a nasmerovať alebo meniť tie naše spôsoby rozmýšľania.
Refining our mental activities, our
a nejak tak vylepšovať tie naše mentálne procesy asi. Nerozumiem mu dobre, lebo nejak vypadáva zvuk.
Understand that you are further helping to put this movement on a very solid ground.
My chápeme, že to robíš preto, aby si postavil toto hnutie na pevný základ. Na pevnú zem.
So I would like to ask for your blessing.
Chcel by som ťa prosiť o požehnanie.
For all those here in Brazil.
Pre všetkých, ktorí sú v Brazílii.
And the whole worldwide community of this movement.
Aj pre celé hnutie na celom svete.
In Christ's name, amen.
V mene Krista, amen.